Hello, Matt
Hello.
Ellison. What a delight to meet you. And I've been really thinking about our conversation and looking forward to this conversation. But before I start, do you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Matt. I'm fast approaching my 50th birthday, which I'm not so keen on.
Well, it's better than the alternative.
Yeah, that's the exact thing I say to people. Yeah, I live in Hampshire. I'm a public speaker, and what I speak about is the fact that I'm transgender. So obviously that's been a big part of my life growing up with many challenges.
Yes, and when I was kind of researching you and thinking about you, I definitely felt nervous because transgender has become such a politically based and movement based topic. And what I felt from what I read about you and heard you speaking, and what I hope that we'll have is that you come from a very kind of personal experience and you're trying to give us all insight into your experience, which will give insight to others' experience because the most personal is often the most universal. But you don't have a drum that you're beating in particular.
I'm not 100% sure what you mean by that.
No, I'm not sure. It feels like you're not you're talking about your experience, but you haven't got a sort of political stick that you're hitting or
Yeah,
something that you're
exactly. Yeah.
wanting you're not wanting to have a fight, you're wanting to build a
Yeah,
bridge.
yeah, that is exactly it. Because one of the things when I first started trying to speak and make a difference, it's very easy to get caught up with all the political stuff online and the haters, and then you end up in a fight, and it all becomes quite negative. And I ended up quite angry inside,
Mm.
and it's like I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to feel bitter. But what I actually want to show the world is not this bitter person that's got this big fight, but I just want to show my journey, having had cards dealt me that were rubbish and with these huge struggles, and that I've overcome them. And because of that, life is now great. It's not a negative, it's such a positive where I am now.
Because I haven't actually asked you my question, which is what is the biggest challenge you are facing or have faced? And I mean, I think you've answered it, but
Yeah,
and I think what I hear from you is that you were dealt these cards that you didn't choose. And do you want to say what those cards were?
yeah. Well, obviously, basically, I don't necessarily like the phrase born in the wrong body, because my body is right now, it's the same body, but that's how people kind of understand it. So I was born the wrong gender, and inside always male, but outside was physically female. And so the challenges that bring, that people that haven't had to live a life like that, they can't even comprehend how deep the little nuances are in every single day of your life that you're facing. So everything is just out of sorts. And obviously that has an effect on you psychologically. And so it could knock your confidence, it could knock your mental health. So obviously that,
Do you want
just
to
that.
give me some examples? I'd love you to go back as early as you can and remember the first time you realized there's
Mm,
this dissonance between how you were seen and how you were responded to and how you were kind of quotes meant to be
yeah.
and how you felt different to that internally.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most interesting things is people quite often, when they ask that question, they'll be, when did you realize you wanted to be a boy? And that wasn't the case at all. It wasn't that I didn't wake up one day and go, oh, actually, I want to be this. I woke up, or not woke up, but it was gradual. Things were coming in. I was just living my life as normal. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute. They're saying I can't wear these clothes. I can't play with these toys.
And this is what
What
age? 5?
younger than that? I would
Okay.
guess 2, 3 years old.
Gosh, very,
Um,
very young. As
yeah,
early as you could speak, basically.
yeah,
And
basically. And it was me slowly figuring out that actually I wasn't what I thought I was. So, like I say, didn't suddenly go, oh, I want to be a boy. It was the world telling me, you're not a boy, you're a girl. You have to wear this dress, you have to wear this skirt. You can't play with that action man. And so that was the first signs of anything gender coming in. And the reason I'm thinking 2 or 3, because obviously I was too young to kind of, I wasn't keeping a diary. The first age that I can definitely pinpoint that something happened was at 5. And that was not the beginning. So it was definitely much earlier than 5.
mm,
And also, I've got a great niece and a great nephew. The niece is now 4. And I would say from 2 or 3, you knew that she was definitely internally a girl. So girly, princess glitter dresses,
Pink,
yeah, everything.
twirly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say that for most children, that's the age, your internal gender, it's a set thing. And I hate it when people go, oh, they're too young to know. But isn't that the point? They're too young to have had any other influence for anything for them to be wrong about their gender.
Yes,
So,
because they're just being themselves. But what
sorry,
I'm thinking is that I mean, I wanted to stick with you, but when you say she was so girly, you can get girls who feel like girls and don't have body dysphoria and want to build trucks or
yeah, yeah,
wear camo, or
yeah,
so you can have Tom, right? It was traditionally sort of tomboy,
yeah,
but there was the quality of what you felt in yourself
yeah.
wasn't
It was a different level.
different level.
Yeah.
There was a level of, is it discomfort? There's is it
Yeah.
a sort of physiological, like, ouch?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard to describe, especially because it's almost like people say, well, how does it feel? And they're thinking in compared to themselves or to not have these issues. And obviously, I
Yeah.
don't know what that felt like. So this
No.
was my life. It just was 100%. But absolutely everything from my friends, I wanted to play with the boys, not the girls. All the things that I wanted to do, whether it be football, toys. I always asked for an action man. I never got it, so I couldn't play properly. And play's a really important part of growing up.
A
That's how we
development. It's a
learn.
huge
Yeah,
part of your
yeah.
development. Yeah.
So that can really hinder you. To just there's two, and I mean I'm not even reaching puberty yet because that's a whole nother level as well. Like when I started school and I'd look at all the boys, I had to wear a skirt to school. I was 1979. I started school at the age of 5, and I would look at the way the boys sit and the way the pockets in their trousers come out, and you see the little, like they've got black trousers and the white lining of of
Yeah.
the pocket, and I would
Exactly.
just envy that. I wanted to be able to sit and have that look on on
So
what I was
interesting.
wearing. There's just too many things, and I really clearly remember one day looking in the mirror. I was wearing a pair of trousers. It wasn't a school uniform. Looking in the mirror and sort of clocking and thinking, oh, okay, boys' waists are lower, and kind of like moving my trousers down and thinking, yeah, that looks better. And from then
That
on,
looks more like me.
that's where my trousers are going to sit from that day on. And I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 at that age. It's just everything, hairstyles.
So there was some instinctive kind of response in you that wanted to be a boy. And when
Yeah,
we look and talk about gender, which is, again, it's complicated how you define gender. Is it the biological you that you're born with? Because non-binary don't necessarily transition through operations,
yeah.
but they don't, they are neither male or female, they are non-binary. How do you define gender? So what sense do you make of it?
That's a really complicated question, because one of the things that's going through my mind as you were saying what you were saying there was obviously internally, yeah, you can get people who are more feminine, more masculine, non-binary, fluid, etc., etc. I'm definitely 100% male, very, very strongly.
That's
But
so
so I'm saying,
interesting.
I knew that, but what is it that made me want an action man? Because is that a social construct?
It's probably
And
social,
if it
isn't it?
is, then why was I drawn to that? Or is the social construct there because boys want to play with action men typically and girls want to play with dolls? Obviously, as you say, not always. And if they don't, it doesn't mean that they're trans. And
No,
that's what makes the world more colourful.
and
So
interesting, yeah.
how do you define gender? I think it's really, really difficult. I mean, one of the biggest things for me, I think, why does the world have gender? And it's to procreate.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where a lot of our instincts come from, and why if you took a very, very stereotypical, which generally you shouldn't do in life, you've got a woman would be attracted to a big strong man because that
The
man is going to
protector.
care for them, yeah.
Yeah.
And so then, and I think that's what gender's there for. Why do we need to necessarily define it? Because we're all different. You get men that are masculine or effeminate, you get women that are
Yeah.
feminine or
And this isn't to be confused with sexuality either, of course, because
yeah, it's
this is
completely
gender. It's
separate.
completely
Yeah.
different. But so can we go back to your personal challenges? So
Mm,
you kind of identified yourself as male and did it really through physical things, through how you played, how you wore trousers, looking at other
yeah.
boys, wanting to be like them. and I imagine didn't voice it to your mum and dad because you didn't have the language
Yeah.
or the insight. Yeah. So tell us about how you were able to find the language to move.
Yeah. Well, it's a long story. It didn't just happen instantly, although there are things that did happen instantly. But my first experience around that, this is why I know I was 5, is because for me, and I don't think of myself as stupid, so when I think, why would I have thought this? But the age 6, just being 6, felt like a boy's age. And so I couldn't imagine being 6 and still being female. So
That's
I
so
thought
interesting.
that on my birthday I'd wake up and I'd be a
You're a
boy.
boy.
I don't know why I thought that, but
Magical
I did.
thinking, a kind of you wanted the dream to come true.
Yeah, yeah. So I told my family, oh, for my 6th birthday, I'm going to be a boy. And the looks that I got back, it was just, I could see it in their faces. I can't remember what they said. What stuck with me is that I got this reaction from how they looked and what they said
Shock.
that this wasn't going to happen and that the world didn't get it. And so that's how I know. I say this wasn't the beginning. It'd been going on for a long, long time. In that moment, at the age of 5, nearly 6, I swore that, right, the world doesn't accept this. I can't do this. I can't say it again. I can't mention it to anything,
So
to
you got the
anyone.
message it's not
Yeah,
okay and had to
yeah,
kind of swallow it down.
yeah,
And
internalize it all.
and that
At a
felt
young
painful.
age. So
Yeah.
no support from my parents, no help, no internet, so there's no access to information.
No.
I knew that there were other trans people, and the old sort of derogatory term of it's the op. I knew that you could have surgery, but my fears were that I'm really sporty, and I consider myself to have been blessed with an okay body. And yet, other than the gender side of it, obviously, but in terms of functioning for my sports and stuff like that. But I had this vision of going and having some surgery, ruining that body and making it look scarred. And yet, because I didn't know anything about hormones or what they could do, that I'd still have essentially a female shaped body, but with scars on it, where I'd had my breasts removed, etc. And I didn't know what was possible, that actually it's very possible. So that was you can't make a decision without informed consent, and I didn't have any information. So I just decided I wasn't going to do this.
And this can't have been at 5 because you
Yeah,
couldn't know, but that was at 5. You knew
yeah.
that
Well, I can't
between
remember
5
about.
and 10 maybe.
Yeah. But it
Yeah.
was 5 that I made the decision that I wasn't going to do this
And that stayed with you
till I was nearly 40.
till you were nearly 40.
Yeah, until I did anything about it. And one of the hardest things
Gosh.
was as well
I could
is
feel my sort of heart sinking that you were
yeah.
kind of
Sorry.
it's painful.
Yeah, yeah. But I knew that, let's say, there was no internet, so I'd made this decision, and it's almost like I'd put this barrier up, so it's really hard to then change that. And the internet came along, and I was watching other trans people transition, and there's so many trans people out there that document their journey. So they'll put on YouTube, and obviously I was watching female to male because that represented me, but I'd watching people and they're growing facial hair, muscles, their voices breaking. There's so many videos of people starting with high pitched voices. This is my voice one day on testosterone, and then 6 months later, really deep manly voices. This is
Is
my
that
voice
yours?
now, and that hurt even more because now I knew what was possible, but I couldn't bring myself to knock that barrier down. So it was tough.
And that's so interesting, isn't it? The sort of almost uninformed decision became
My
the
life.
most powerful influence in your life, that you
Yeah.
couldn't kind of open yourself to
Yeah.
other possibilities. And I imagine it was both the fear that you would somehow ruin your really good body, but
Yeah.
also it was in relation to how your parents looked at you. I imagine there was
Yeah.
a feeling of, I won't be loved, I won't
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
accepted, I'll upset people.
The biggest thing is I thought I was a freak, and obviously I'm not, and that I would be seen more as a freak if I transitioned. And I had this weird feeling that people already, because I was odd, I was a tomboy. I used to wear boys' shoes to school, even though I had to wear a skirt. And I don't know how I didn't get bullied, but I didn't. I was very shy and introverted and stuff. But I had this feeling that people would think that I was a freak. And when you're a child and you get someone that is a little bit different and they sort of go, oh, I don't want to touch them. Ugh.
It's
That's how
catching. Yeah.
people would view me, and that they wouldn't even want to brush past me. Literally, people wouldn't want to touch me. And that was how I was, let alone if I transitioned.
And psychologically, we know that we have this evolutionary wiring from the hunter-gatherer, savannah,
Mm.
millennia far back of the only way to survive is to be part of the tribe. So if you were the freak, you would
Yeah,
be exiled from the tribe and you
yeah,
would die. And it
yeah,
sounds like the feeling you had, if I become a freak, I will die. It's
yeah,
like my life is over. I
yeah,
need to belong
yeah.
at whatever the cost.
But that's a really interesting point as well in terms of my plight as a trans person trying to improve education around this and any minority is that I mention this sometimes where I think that's where this comes from. And if you take a flock of birds and one of them, they're white birds, and one of them's
The
bright
black,
purple, what's
purple,
going to
yeah.
happen? That's a danger to their tribe because it gets noticed so they'll get attacked. And so I think that's where that instinct to push anything that's different is away. It's a safety mechanism to protect because it's literally life or death.
Yeah.
But for us in the society that we live in now, it's not life and death, but we've got this
No.
innate thing in us that people still will make fun of anyone that's got any little bit of difference. And I almost think we think of ourselves as intelligent, but these people that are haters, that hate someone because they're gay or trans or a different color or speak a different language or a different religion, it doesn't matter anymore. That's not a threat to society. It makes
No.
it more interesting. Why can't we realize that?
And there's also something, the survival mechanism that is also inaccurate in the sense that survival of the fittest isn't through, I'm going to knock the weak one out and I'm
Yeah.
going to go to the top. It's through collaboration. It's
Yeah.
through building relationship. It's through helping each other out, through kind of, so you
Yeah.
deal with the cow
Teamwork.
and
Yeah.
maybe you've got a broken leg so you can't do that, and so that you can help each other, and
Yeah.
that's the survival of the
Yeah.
fittest. But we have
Yeah.
this idea of kind of having to elbow the weak, and it's somehow instinctive but also incredibly destructive.
And very true as well, because I think my topic is D&I, diversity and inclusion. And if a company thinks, oh, I won't employ this person because they're transgender or because they're gay or because they're in a wheelchair, is that not hindering their opportunity to
Yeah,
take on an employee that might actually be amazing for their company and be
yeah,
much better than
brings
someone
so
who
much
isn't?
talent. Yeah,
Yeah, you should look through that and see what has that person got to give.
I agree. And so it took you all these decades, and tell me how you opened up to giving
Yeah.
yourself permission to be who you fully are.
Well, there's a few different things that all came together, so it wasn't just one thing. But the main thing was I used to look on YouTube and look at these videos and have this yearning that, oh, if I could take testosterone, because I had this thing I could say I being a sporty person, I would say to myself, would I rather be me and be female and do my martial arts and my judo that I used to do, or would I rather be male and maybe have a body that isn't particularly sporty or fit? And I think, okay. And it was like a coping mechanism that
Mm.
I'd rather have both. But if I had to choose, it made me feel better that at least I've got this. But what I didn't realize is if I transitioned and took hormones, then I could have both because I'd still have the same body, but I'd be on testosterone and I have more muscle and still have this same sporty body, but be male. So I was watching YouTube videos and learning this and really wanting to do it. And it felt a bit Pandora's box. So it would get too much, become overwhelming because I was watching these videos and I'd just have to walk away from it. And then slowly
And you
there
were
was,
working. I mean, what was your life before?
um,
You were working, you were in a relationship, you
yeah,
had good relationships.
I was in a relationship, and in fact, a male relationship because I'm gay, and he was the only person that knew. He guessed right when we first met and asked me outright. So I didn't tell a soul, but I said yes when he asked me. So I had that support, which was nice. I was working as a guitar teacher, and there's so much around this. If you want to come back to stuff like this, around how much it affected my career choices and therefore my income, my standard of living, just because of being trans and not being able to go down certain routes because of clothing and stuff like that. As a guitar teacher, I didn't have to dress smartly and wear women's clothes. So I did that, but you don't earn a lot of money from that. I was running a
No.
guitar school at the time. But I'd get in from teaching and I would run up, look at YouTube videos. And I would say it was probably over a period of roughly a year. I'm not sure. This yearning inside me, like I said, I was opening Pandora's box and it was just getting stronger and stronger until I couldn't dampen it down. And in the end, I had so many coping mechanisms to help me continue living as I was and continue living in a female body. My first instinct was, I just need help with that. I'm going to go and speak to someone and just see if I can get some more coping strategies. But there was something inside me that really wanted to, I was thinking, I know that if I go and speak to a therapist, the therapist can't say, you need to do this. And they can't make that decision for me. But I know that their role is also to unlock things inside me. And what I was hoping was that who I saw was going to help me be able to do this, even though at this point I still had my barriers up. It wasn't what I was going for. I was hoping for some coping mechanisms to continue as I was, but with this little hope that maybe this is it.
Hidden
Yeah.
underneath.
Yeah. And that's exactly what this person did. And in one sentence, there was something very clearly. I remember that he said to me that unlocked 40 years of fear. It was just incredible.
What was the sentence?
The sentence itself was, well, one day people will come into your life and they'll have only ever known you as Matt. And that was it. So do you want me to unpack that a little bit?
Yes, yes.
So that's something I mentioned in most of my talks. And what I've said before then is how all my fears were about being rejected by my friends and family, fear of what others would think, fear of harm, fear of being beaten up. I had all these fears, but it's all to do with the people around me.
Yeah.
So, and being trans itself isn't a big problem because with treatment, we can alleviate it. We can't make life perfect, but we can improve life. And like I say, I'm in a really good space now. But it was thinking, and as you grow up, you meet more and more people through work, through hobbies, etc. And I would literally, I'd visualize someone and think, what if they knew? What if they knew? I couldn't tell. I couldn't. And at the moment that he said that to me, it just, like a brick hitting me, made me realize if I had done this at 20, all of these people that have met me, they'd have only ever known Matt.
Yeah, so it collapsed all the walls that you'd built up.
Yeah. And the people that knew me before, at the age of 40, 20 years previously, it'd be yesterday's news. They've moved on. They'd have forgotten about it. And that was the first time when I realized I was just living in the moment of having to tell all these people, and that actually I could get past that and I could build a life that I could live.
How amazing. And so was it your parents? Was that the hardest conversation to have?
No, it wasn't actually. I was driven by upset when I told them, because I decided that I wanted to do this and I went to visit my GP. And care in the UK, there's still a lot of work that's needed there. And bearing in mind, this was 10 years ago now as well. But my GP was quite old, and that's not necessarily a thing, but the generations can have a difference.
Yeah, definitely.
And she was just absolutely rubbish. My partner came with me and she said, but I see you as all woman, which is weird because I was always spent most of my life being read as a male, even though I wasn't trying to be. But some people just can't see that. And gender's funny like that. I came out in tears, literally. I walked out of the doctor's surgery onto the stairs outside, and I still remember it, and just burst into tears because of her reaction. And I got home, I was really upset, and I used that emotion as a driver. My parents they lived abroad. Yeah. So I called them on Skype in Spain and just explained what was going on, because I knew that they knew that there was gender issues there because of some stuff that happened around puberty and from sort of 14 to 16, but I'd never actually spoken to them personally about it.
And they'd never asked you?
No, I felt like it had been swept under the rug. I actually saw a psychiatrist at around 15, and there's various things for how that came out. And I remember being given a leaflet on gender identity. Eventually I'd opened up to someone about it and then got passed on to a gender specialist. And my parents took me to the appointments, but we missed an appointment, which, I wouldn't like to speak about this publicly and have them know this and feel bad, but they've both passed away now. So there's no issues with that. But my parents used to be taxi drivers, and my dad got lost on the way to the hospital in London. And
an analyst would say that was no accident.
Exactly. And I actually, if you knew my dad, it probably was. But at the time, the message to me was,
this doesn't matter.
He didn't want to take me to that appointment, and it never got remade. And there was other things that happened there that my mum had said some stuff. And I just, like I say, it was never ever spoken about directly to them. I just had got past because I had so much trouble. This is something as well to possibly talk about, going through puberty and monthly cycles and bleeding and stuff. But I had so many issues with that I eventually had to see a counsellor. And I remember I didn't want to say why the issues were there. And it was because as a male, I shouldn't be bleeding. But I was suicidal over that.
Oh, Matt.
And when I eventually did, they passed me to somebody else. And I actually felt in safe hands in my GP surgery. But as soon as it was established that obviously there was a gender issue there, I got passed to apparently at the time, the only specialist in London. And he wasn't very nice. I didn't enjoy going to those sessions.
He's a bit
I know how
brutal.
powerful sessions like that can be, but to me, they can also be a negative if done wrong.
Diminishing, yeah.
And at that time they were. And I still remember consequences of those sessions a decade or more later where it hurt me. Yeah. So I didn't really want to go back. No. My dad got lost on the way to the hospital, and I felt like they literally just swept it under the rug and didn't. So I felt like I couldn't talk to them about it.
So they were giving you that very strong message, which was what we don't speak about isn't going to hurt you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And don't think about it, don't speak about it. Kind of take you to the doctor to deal with it, but then somehow...
But they didn't know at that point what that was. So that wasn't anything gender when I got taken to the counsellor. Right. That was just because my mum couldn't understand. I've read my notes. I've requested my notes back from that time. I say it's over 30 years ago. Yeah. It says that my mum described me as Jekyll and Hyde. So most of the time quite happy. Quite happy most of the time. But for the time that I was on my period and I was bleeding,
furious.
I couldn't cope with life. I would barely leave the house.
Very extreme.
Because the stress of that is massive.
Yeah. No, I can see that now. If you're really the body of a man having a period, you feel like kind of crazy.
She couldn't understand why I couldn't cope with something that was so natural. Yeah. I just couldn't.
Have you got siblings?
I've got two sisters that are half sisters from my mum's previous marriage. So they're quite a bit older than me.
She'd raised daughters, so for her that was even more confusing.
Yeah. But I want to point out though that actually they were completely on side.
Were they?
So I don't think they... I mean, obviously times were very different back then.
That was they were 80s. Ignorant and had no idea. Yeah.
I think one point my mum did mention, having discussed it with her once I transitioned, that she had fears knowing that there were gender issues there. Oh, how would I be accepted? How would they deal with this? So I think they were just scared for me and for themselves. Yeah, and obviously now times have changed. And one of their biggest things that they've always said to me was that they feel so bad that I suffered for so long, that I hadn't done it sooner. Because obviously they saw me flourish, because being you is such an uplifting experience.
You've kind of flown into yourself. And finally, when your body and your identity and your sense of yourself is aligned and fits, then you can really thrive.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I want to point out, is that when I'm speaking about this and I try and explain what gender transition is, because people still think of it just as the physical side of things. It is that operation. But to me, what's happening is that people can see that. So it's something very easy physical to understand. Yeah. Mm. But what they don't understand, which is why people don't understand gender, because they think, well, you're born physically like that. That's what you can see. You can't see what's happening inside. And that's the important bit, is the bit that you can't see. Yeah. But what is gender transition? It's basically just living as you. It's being your psychological self. Yourself. And so obviously that usually, not always, because not everyone wants to go down that route. There's no right or wrong. Everyone's journey is different. But it usually involves some sort of surgery and hormones. Mm. But that's not what it is. To me, that's just a vehicle. It's a mechanism of getting to where you need to be. And now I'm me. I've obviously, most of my physical changes have happened, but I'm still growing inside, because I'm now comfortable and happy. And that's an incredible position to be in. It's amazing.
And I can see you smiling. It's like you're kind of shining. Exactly. You are really kind of growing into yourself and maybe grieving for the years that you weren't fully yourself, but also grieving them, finding yourself and discovering new aspects of yourself. I have written about this in one of my books, about non-binary and sexuality and gender identity, but also I'm very heterosexual, and 64. So I'm of my generation. So I also kind of want to acknowledge my ignorant. So if I'm saying this wrong, please put me straight. But some of the criticism and complexity is recognizing the difference between body dysphoria, which is what you have, where you're
Yeah,
kind of in the wrong body, is a simple way, a shorthand
yeah,
way of saying
yeah,
it, and someone who has mental health issues, who has body dysmorphia,
yeah,
who doesn't like their body, but actually is using that as a vehicle to act out against themselves as a kind of self-attack.
yeah.
And that it's influenced through culture and many other kind of influences, and how we can begin to identify the difference between the two, because it's very significant, the difference.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same. There's just, everyone's different and everyone's got a different story. And you get to use the terms, so obviously you've got transgender, that used to be more transsexual, but that seems like a quite a negative connotation. And then you've got transvestite, which is someone who just cross dresses. They just feel the need to, that's what they need to do. They want to wear those clothes. And as you say, you've got people that are just, they want to be taller or shorter, or not have so much weight, or be less skinny. And there's so many different layers. But the trans thing, I don't think it's just hating your body per se. There is a real dysphoria around just having the wrong body. And people just don't understand that. I often think, well, if David Beckham woke up one morning with breasts, how would he feel? How would the world feel about that? That's how I felt. Not like
Yeah.
David Beckham. Obviously, I wish I was David Beckham. I don't think people, because they only see the outside and they say you were born physically female, so you are female, you will never be anything different. And I think, well, actually, no, it's my body was female, but always my brain was male.
Yeah. So to answer my question, is it that it's so subjective and so uniquely individual? It's really, you can only work out what is a mental health issue and what is a gender identity
Yeah.
issue with each individual.
Yeah, I mean, there's about three different questions to answer there.
Okay.
But one of the things I'd say is that, yeah, everybody's journey is individual, but there's so many similarities for everyone. So, for example, the thing with any trans person you speak to is they'll typically say it's always been there. And you get one of two ways that can go, is that they either say, like myself, I always knew that I was the
Yeah,
wrong
from
gender,
so young.
or they'll say, I didn't know what it was. I figured it out when I was older, but there was issues and I didn't know what was causing it. So
Yeah,
they'll say, yes, it was always there. I just didn't know what it was. I found out
yeah.
later. I worked it out. So it's obviously always there.
The sense of
Um,
discrepancy or
yeah,
discomfort. Yeah.
yeah. So everyone's story is different, but if you're trans, you are trans. But then the other thing, talking about the mental health issues, is I know how mental health issues grow. And so, as another example of a teacher holding a glass out and asking the students arm's length, how heavy is this glass? And then they're guessing or whatever. And she says, well, it depends how long you've been holding it. And as I'm
It's a
sure
good
you'll
metaphor.
be very
Yeah.
aware of, as how traumas build. And so what starts off, we can take a trauma and we feel a bit low for a day. We have something bad happens and you lose a bet and you feel a bit low, and the next day you've forgotten about it. But when things happen again and again and
So
again, yeah,
weathering
yeah. So yeah,
the wear and tear of
yeah, if
the
you stub your
discomfort.
toe on a good day, you go, ow, 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 it hurts. But if you're having a massive argument and going through a divorce and your pet's just been put to sleep, or something bad's happened and you stub your toe, it's too much, it's overwhelming and you burst into tears, because the more you carry, the harder it becomes. And so mental health issues, they develop from being a little bit sad to feeling depressed to even becoming bipolar, which can clear up post transition. So the mental health issues are very often there for trans people because they're living this life. But like I say, you can't begin to imagine that the layers and the facets every single day as a trans person that you're living with, that's a struggle. And it feels like every single thing, from how you look, how you feel, how you're acting, how people are treating you, the clothes you've got permission to wear, day in, day out, looking at yourself in the mirror, it wears you down over years, decades, that can equate to quite strong mental health issues.
Issues. And
But they're there
so
because you're trans, not because you naturally have mental health
mental health
problems.
issues. No, the two are directly related.
Yeah.
So now that you have transitioned, tell me the last 10 years how your life has gone and what have you learned and what do you want people to know? That's three very big questions.
Very big questions. What do I want people to know? Like I say, I try and get across that it's not a phase. People can go through phase and there's safety mechanisms in place. So there won't be any harm done if a child is going through a phase. I can go into that if you need me to. But if you're trans, you're trans. It can be diagnosed really quickly. And actually, by delaying it and making someone wait and have a decade of transition, it's all consuming. And actually, I was very lucky that I transitioned very quickly and then I can live my life. So I wish people understood it better and didn't say they're too young. What if it's a phase? What if it's this? You'll never be a man or you'll never be a woman. Actually, people, if they understood, they'd go, okay, this person's trans, they'll transition.
How do you the difference between a phase and it being diagnosed, as it were?
Okay, there's actually a really good TED talk by a guy called Norman Spack that explains it. So if you look up Norman Spack,
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, he explains really perfectly. So he's an endocrinologist, and what he says is that if people are going through a phase, by the time they reach puberty, they'll have grown out of it, basically. Which to me, he didn't say this, but to me that makes sense, because if you think about like sexuality, obviously we don't always know our sexuality as a child because we're not thinking about sex. Gender's a little bit different. It starts much earlier. But by the time you get to puberty and the hormones start kicking in, that's when the sort of the real you comes out. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. So he basically says if someone's reached puberty, says they're in the wrong body, then they are, basically. But before that, there's nothing to be done. Other than the actual genitals, it's hormones that send our body to grow facial hair or breasts or grow tall or not tall or voices to break, etc. And that doesn't happen until puberty. That's when our bodies give off estrogen and stuff. So there's nothing to be done physically for a trans person until they've reached puberty, by which time we know that they're trans. So if it's a phase, we can transition socially. So you can send a 5, 10, 15-year-old to school as whatever gender they like, with whatever name they want, wearing whatever school uniform they feel most comfortable in. It's not doing any harm whatsoever. And if it's a phase, they will then go, oh, actually, I'm growing out of that. And you can reverse all that. There's absolutely no harm done.
Yes. I mean, the push against that I instinctively feel is maturity and development. And what we understand now is that a young person isn't fully mature until they're 25 to 28. Yeah. And what you're saying is that they would know as a teenager, and it doesn't sit that comfortably with me.
Really? Okay.
Just because I'm not sure one can fully make such a life-changing decision when you're not sort of fully mature. But you're saying the longer you leave it, the more harm it's doing.
Can do, yeah.
Can do.
But what the thing for me is, like, people say, oh, they say you're too young, you're not old enough to know stuff. But isn't that the point? Is that, say, from 3, 4, 5 years old, they haven't got any external influences for them to go, oh, my friend's a boy, you just instinctively do things. And if you take someone who isn't in the wrong body, so, did you go through a phase and sort of think, well, when I got to this age, that's when I realized that I was right, that I was a girl, that I was female. You don't think about it the same way as someone who's gay agonizes about coming out, and they may fight their sexuality because they feel it's wrong for whatever reason, or they just don't want to come out. And yet, if you're heterosexual, you don't give it a second thought.
There's no conflict.
There's no like, oh, I've decided I'm heterosexual, because you just are. But so is a gay person, so is a trans person. So actually, if you are, you just are.
Tell me about how you flourished, how the last 10 years have been, and what you want people to know. Yeah.
It doesn't happen overnight.
No.
So all of a sudden, I've come out, I've changed my name, and...
You're in relationship with the same person?
Yeah. Who's
Amazing.
bisexual, so that works. No difference to that. We've been together 20 years now.
Wow.
But
that must have been a big important part of your journey.
Yeah, and I was so lucky to have that support, because you need support. There's apparently a 93% reduction in suicide risk for a trans person if their parents are supportive. And yet I see so many people being rejected by their parents for this. scary. So yeah, I had support. I was very lucky that literally I started hormones in the end of October 2013, and by January 2014 my voice had just started to drop. Hadn't finished. That took a good few years. It dropped quickly and then it just slowly kept going down. But as soon as it started, my voice passed on the phone, and so not many trans people are afforded this luxury, but I've passed as male. So it means people that see me, read me as male within, what's that, 3 months, 4 months of starting transition. So I was extremely lucky, and I can now wear the clothes that I felt comfortable in. So that was all very quick. But internally, things don't change. It felt like a game. It didn't feel real. And also my body hadn't changed enough to look that masculine. So there was still, I was passing. But when I look back at those pictures now and I thought I looked great because I changed a little bit, that's nothing compared to 5, 6, 7 years on hormones. But so it takes a long time emotionally to fit into this new acceptance. And
change
it's not
always
like
takes forever. I mean, whatever it is.
Yeah, but it's not like people go, right, well, you were female and now you're male. Because the thing was, I was always male, so that didn't change. It's a really weird thing to describe. It wasn't like I went from one to the next. It was just the outer shell slowly coming into line with how I was. And it's almost, you feel like, well, something needs to change, and it doesn't. So this feeling I felt how I was obviously it was male, but the world was telling me that was female. So I'm thinking, well, this needs to change, when actually my internal sense of who I am didn't need to change. It's almost I needed to just accept who I was. So very slowly that's coming into play. And then it's taken me a while to look at men's clothing, just walking through a department store and feeling completely detached from the women's section is incredible.
Liberating.
Yeah. And going through all the fashion disaster that I wanted to as a kid in the 80s, because it's like, you've got to get it out of your system. So I've bought so many ties that I've never worn because I just wanted to wear ties. And then just, it's like a weight off your shoulder. I'm
lighter,
me.
so much lighter.
And in fact, this thing about me always thinking that I was be seen as a freak, I know I feel like I need to be careful, because I don't want people to, I feel like I should be careful using that word around this, because trans people are not freaks. But I'm being honest with how I felt about myself.
Because that's the narrative.
And when I said to my partner, people will think I'm odd or weird, and he quite bluntly but very cleverly, because this was perfect, said to me, no, you won't be a freak, but you're a freak now. And he was 100% right. So I was this person that people didn't understand, that was a big tomboy and a bit odd and different. I stood out, whereas now I don't stand out, because people read me as male and I act male, and it's the complete opposite. I'm now just bog standard like everybody else, because I'm me.
Interesting.
So, and that just means like a weight off my shoulder, and I've grown in confidence. Obviously, I've now changed my career to be a speaker, which I absolutely love this job. And I never thought it's a topic that people are drawn to. It's very, like you say, political at the moment. So people go, oh, and it pricks people's ears. And I say to people, I'm lucky that I've got this story. And then I'm lucky. I just say that, that I'm lucky I was born like this. But it's amazing, because the good that it does, every single talk I do, people learn things that they go, wow, I'd not thought of this, I hadn't considered that. And it's really obvious that people think they're going to get a good talk, but what they get is so much better, because they can't conceive hearing my story. And can you imagine having a job like that? And I've had people, in a good way, because it's not good to make people cry, but go, wow, I was in tears.
Very moving.
Or come up to me and say, not even trans, I had someone that had another physical issue, their daughter did, and they came and said to me, they were almost in tears, I'm going to phone my daughter, because I now get where they were coming from in terms of having had surgery to correct that, and now feeling like a different person, and not wanting people previously, wanting to move sort of their environment that they were in. So life, to be able to do that is just incredible. So I feel like I've I've arrived home. So I've changed physically, I've grown inside, and I've changed my career, which now for the first time in my life, I'm earning an okay living doing this, which it's just everything slotted into place. It's incredible.
Oh, Matt, that's incredibly moving. And thank you so much for being so honest and for kind of telling your very kind of personal story, but saying it so publicly and so articulately to enable people like me and our listeners to understand this complex and kind of very conflicted conversation in a way that you say it does feel like you really build a bridge of understanding so that there is less conflict and more compassion.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for asking all the questions.
It's a pleasure. Hello, Emily and Sophie. This week we're talking about my conversation with Matt Ellison. And so I wonder what your first thoughts are.
Well, I think my very first thought was, what was it like for you? Because I think I just listened to you, but for various reasons, I watched you instead of just listened to you because of how technical things. And I did wonder what it was like for you recording it. Like, you seemed maybe a bit worried.
You put me on the spot at the very beginning. Again. Thanks, Em. No, I think gender and transgender is a complex subject, and it's not one I have a huge amount of confidence in the sense that I don't work with people who are transgender. I mean, I've thought about it and I wrote about it in This Too Shall Pass. I work with someone who was non-binary. So I have a kind of psychological understanding of it, but I don't think I have an embodied, confident response to it. And because it's so politically hot, I think probably what you read in my face, because me say, well, maybe others wouldn't have read it, is that I was, only thinking about this now, was that I was kind of wary of saying the wrong thing. But actually, I also knew that with Matt, the way he presents himself and the way that he is, he's not enormously touchy. He wasn't going to turn on me. So I kind of felt both. I felt I was really curious and interested to hear his experience and learn more in order to develop my confidence and kind of have more embodied sense of how I feel and think in response to transgender. But I think particularly to begin with, I was kind of tiptoeing around, which I think you read very correctly.
Yeah, but I also sort of think that speaks to a lot of what's so difficult to talk about in terms of thinking about gender identity and transgender, is because I think so many people do feel like they're going to say the wrong thing and that you're inevitably going to maybe unintentionally offend. I think people feel very strongly on both ends of the spectrum. Like, people have big reactions when you talk about transgender. I think particularly when you are talking about people who are transgender that are children or teens, people have very, very emotive reactions, and it makes it difficult to do exactly what you did, which is to have an open conversation, be open to learning, be open to making mistakes,
getting it wrong,
and being corrected. And I'm just sort of really curious about what is it about this that seems to create so much, like, I don't know if it's fear or intensity. Like, I wonder what is so provokes such big reactions. Like, does it feel like a threat to people?
I think it's an interesting conversation, isn't it? I think there's probably, I imagine that over time, when we step back, we'll also see that it's part of a bigger cultural, political narrative of what is going on in terms of politics more generally. But I think above all with these things, a bit as with sexuality, what we don't understand, we have a tendency to fear, and then fear tends to make us feel threatened and go much more rigid and black and white and struggle with complexity. And then equally on the other side of the trans community, when you've experienced so much discrimination, so much hurt, so much misunderstanding, and so much abuse and mental health difficulty, they're a minority. They're a minority under attack, right? So that dialogue is fraught, therefore, on both sides. People are coming to it with so much hurt and charge. And then there's the online social media storm that just adds another layer, doesn't it? To people are afraid of doing. I mean, I'm not saying anything that everybody doesn't already know, but
I think it's important to say it. And The thing I feel about the social media, which again we sort of know, and I feel it's important to name, is the difference between Matt and I talking was that we were together. I could make a mistake. We had a rupture and he could explain it to me and we could repair. I think with social media is that there's this transmission of attack. And then when someone feels attacked, it's impossible to receive what someone's saying because you shut down. And so you either attack back or just turn away. So it's very bi-directional.
And there's no nuance, there's no space for any kind of nuance or explanation. And I think people who are sort of vitriolic on social media, they're not there to actually engage in a conversation. They're just there to really show you their very strong opinions. Yeah. I think there is a generational
Definitely
difference too. I think you mentioned, Mum, in your interview, I see a lot of teens, and when I worked at Yale, they have a gender clinic there that I worked in conjunction with, and my sort of purely personal clinical experience is that there is a difference between someone who is transgender, and then I think for a lot of teens, part of the teen experience now is really doing what all teens have done for all time, which is around exploring their identity. But part of that exploration is an exploration of gender and sexuality. And I think that's quite a difficult thing for older generations to understand, that there is much more fluidity in how a lot of teens think about sexuality and gender. And it also means there's more flexibility. It means that teens can explore saying, oh, I'm non-binary for a bit, and then be like, oh, actually, no, maybe I'm. So I think there's a lot of fear about okay, well, my teen has said that they are this thing, and now they've set this path for life. And I don't think it's not a fear that I have sort of seen borne out in that. I think there is a flexibility. And I also think that an exploration of gender and sexuality is really different to being transgender, which is like being homosexual. It's something that you are born being. It's not something that you can alter. And I think that creates a lot of confusion, the difference between those things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I was thinking, Mum, when you had that moment exchange with him and he was saying, I thought he was so generous, by the way. What a lovely, generous man. So generous with his story, with his understanding, with his compassion for not being understood, and that's such a valuable. The moment when he was saying, I actually watched that TED talk. He spoke about someone SPAC, I can't remember his first name, talking about adolescence and puberty and transgender. And you were saying you thought possibly people were too young to make that decision. And he was saying in his experience, and according to this endocrinologist, if that's what they're saying at the point of puberty, that is the state of things. And I was like, oh, I'm interested in that, because you had different views and you couldn't resolve it in that moment. It's not a long enough conversation. But I was looking at transition statistics. Like, is it a thing? Is it true? Does it borne out in statistics that people who transition regret transitioning? And on average, only 3% of trans people who transition have any regrets, the majority of which are in fact not about transitioning. They're about the social, financial, and relationship implications that they have for doing it. So we have this fear, like, oh, they're too young. And we're talking about a tiny percent of the population, not, like Emily said, differentiating between this sort of fluidity in identity and a kid that has said for a long time from a young age that they feel that they're in the wrong body, that doesn't fit their inside world. So I think it's really useful to have that statistic, because actually our fear is not the facts. When we look at the facts, 1 to 3%. In the UK, when they did a study of over 4,000 trans children adults who transitioned in their lifetime, less than 0.04% regretted it. So I just think that's useful to know that information.
I think it's really useful. I think where people get stuck, or where there's not enough research yet, is the age that you transition. And I think a huge part of the sort of polemic is around puberty blockers, hormone suppressants, all of these things. Like, when is the right time to start those things? And I think the difficulty is that there's not one answer. I don't think there's this sort of unilateral, well, if your teen is saying this at this age, that means for sure anything. And the CAS review that was published in January that has actually stopped puberty blockers being prescribed to anyone under the age of 16. And you can imagine big reactions on all sides. But actually, if you read the CAS report, which I have not read the whole of because it's like nearly 300 pages, but I've sort of read the highlights, it's actually quite nuanced. It basically says it's not that we think puberty suppressors are wrong. It's not that we think hormone treatment is wrong. It's that the current treatment for gender dysphoria is really different to how you would approach any other clinical diagnosis. And what they're saying is whenever you have a child presenting with gender dysphoria, the sort of correct course of treatment should be thinking about that child holistically, as you would with any other kind of clinical difficulty. And also that there just isn't enough research on the long-term impact. So there just needs to be more trials in terms of puberty blockers. So it's very much not saying puberty blockers are bad and wrong and we don't think that they should be prescribed. It's saying let's just pause, adjust, make sure that people presenting with gender dysphoria who are really struggling are being seen in a holistic way, and also that we just need more research.
Is the implications for now, this is just my understanding, that currently, therefore, puberty blockers will not be prescribed until the clarity. So the sort of real-time experience of trans kids is that they can't access really puberty blockers. So that's really hard. That makes me feel sad inside.
It is sad. Unless they are on a clinical trial.
This is the generational thing. I feel relief when I hear that. I think, oh, good. Because I'm not sure I mean...
But I think the thing is that it's just, it feels, I think the difficulty is that for some people, puberty blockers are a lifeline. And for others, maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe there's all sorts of other things to do with exploring identity, neurodiversity, all of these other factors. And so...
Because there's a higher rate of transgender issues when you're neurodiverse, isn't there? And I don't know what the implications of that are. But it is really a generational divide between you and me. So my position is that I don't know enough, is the true position.
I imagine your response would be different if you had either whatever your generation is, potentially, given who you are, if you had a child who was suicidal,
that's what
in the state of their body, and that if you could offer them a puberty blocker that just allowed them a breathing space in their psychological distress to figure out what really needs to happen, to have that lifeline removed for families as well as the children themselves, is pretty devastating, I think.
Yes, and I just think, I have seen quite a big spectrum of teens exploring their own identity, and some of them some transgender teens I've seen have been really suicidal because they haven't had access to medication and they haven't had family support, social support. And then I've also seen teens who are questioning their identity and exploring it socially through like changing their name, changing how they present themselves, but are much more questioning of whether this is definitely how they feel. And I think that in order to access medication, it's not like you just go and they're like, oh, here you go. There's a lot of safeguarding that goes on, that you go through a lot of clinical assessments, where if you said like, oh, I'm not totally sure, they wouldn't be like, oh, like, here you go, why don't we just give this a try? So it's just much more nuanced than...
Because I get what you're saying, and I would be devastated if I had a child who was suicidal because they couldn't get puberty blockers. At the same time, and on the other hand, I think I could say to that child, listen, we're going to do what we can to support you. And we're talking a few years waiting to see how you are. So dress as the gender you choose. Use the name that you choose. I will treat you as how you wish me to treat you. I'll call you the name that you wish me to call you. But doing something that changes your biology. And I know it just blocks your biology. It gives time for that, what you're talking about, experimentation, which I find calming.
But on the other hand, the whole time those years that they're waiting, Mum, their body is then developing in the direction that most upsets them. So it's not like the point of the puberty blockers is to try and create a standstill. Whereas if you feel like a boy inside, but your anatomy is female, you're growing breasts, you're growing, and then if you then come to the result is surgery, which is much more physically demanding then if you take puberty blockers and then take testosterone, and you don't have to have the same amount of surgery as like breast removal, for example. So I don't think it's necessarily, things can get worse over that time, even for young people.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So complicated. Oof.
But Mums, when you were talking to Matt, you asked, like, what is gender? How do you define gender? And for anyone who is curious, there's a very lovely resource that was designed for young people, but actually is helpful for old people too.
Most things for young are good for old, to be honest.
Yeah. And it's called The Genderbread Person. And it kind of, it's this sort of outline of this person, and it just shows the different aspects of gender. So there's like gender expression, as in what you wear. There's gender identity. So what is the gender that you identify with. Then there's like your biological sex, which is your biological body parts.
What you were born with.
Yeah. And then there's your sexual attraction, like who you're attracted to. And then there's sort of different scales of each of them, sort of like where would you put yourself on this little spectrum. And I also think it's a helpful example of that basically most people in terms of not many people are 100% straight or like given the right person, right context. Right.
And it's very culturally influenced.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
It's a nice, nuanced way of just thinking about gender and also breaking it down into its different bits.
I think what's also nice about that is it invites the wider question of and this is to get it stepping away from the child question, but as adults, do we believe in our right to independently decide who we are? And those are all just facets of who we get to define ourselves to be, aren't they? It's just another facet of that. It sort of creates that, like, I personally would really believe in every person's right to define that for themselves. And it's just another one alongside sexuality, and that we kind of are much more used to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's true.
No, I just think that it's such a big conversation that it feels difficult to fit it all in our chat. And I suppose the thing I would say is to sort of hold on to the fact that most people coming into this conversation have the best intentions and are trying to work out what like feels right. So, and the more that you can have an open dialogue instead of jumping straight to like, you're wrong, I'm right.
Yeah.
I think that it's usually more constructive, and probably one of us has got something wrong to somebody.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, the big thing I take from us talking now and from Matt is to let myself be open and have my mind changed, to go back and forth, to listen, to learn, and not be rigid. And I may default back to rigidity, but be open to being changed. I think when people feel changed, I think in communication, even if I disagree with you, if you believe that my intention is to understand you and hear you and still hold my view, but allow and validate your view, that is a very different thing than trying to knock you out with my view. So there's obviously a lot more to say.
The last thing I was going to say is, just because we've talked quite a lot more generally, is just to say it's always lovely to hear a story of someone coming into their own and sort of flourishing. And it was really joyful and moving to hear from him how much happiness has come to him, and sort of the universe has aligned for him as his sort of body and self have been able to come aligned. And I just appreciated that in his story, irrelevant to the sort of transgender element.
That was beautiful, and I felt very, very moving. And he's an amazing ambassador for it. So I'm very grateful to him for the conversation and for you too. And obviously we need to talk more. And everybody listening, I'd love to know what your conversations around the kitchen table are around this. And it is such a complex subject. Also, for everyone listening, if you think this is useful, that you want to share with your family or friends, do please share it. And as I always ask you, do please rate and review, because it allows people to find us. And most of all, thank you for listening. We really appreciate that you download us.